everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing well. For anyone that doesn't know me, my name is Katie and I am a qualified therapist who's really passionate about all things mental health, wellness, therapy and personal development. In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down the mental health condition of Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, also known as OCD for short. As usual, please don't be put off by the title. No one is dumb for not knowing what OCD is or not knowing much about OCD. And actually, the way the term OCD can be used sometimes by our peers, as well as what we see in the media, can create very confusing narratives and false narratives as well. I think a lot of people don't really know what OCD actually is, especially as it's used sometimes as a replacement for somebody who's really organised or really clean. But hopefully today's video will give a really good summary and a really good starting point for anyone that thinks that they might be suffering with OCD or just wants to learn a lot more about it. As usual, I'm going to be putting timestamps in the description below, so feel free to just go to the parts that are the most relevant for you. So to start off with, what is OCD? So Obsessive Compulsive Disorder is, according to the NHS website, a mental health condition where a person is suffering with obsessive thoughts and carrying out compulsive behaviours. So there's three core elements to OCD. There's the obsessive thoughts, the emotions, and the compulsive behaviours. So for example, somebody might have the theme of harm, because there's different themes that can come up with OCD, and I'll talk about those later on. But if you're somebody that has the theme of harm, you might be having obsessive thoughts around harming someone. Oh my God, am I going to harm somebody? I keep seeing images of me harming somebody. I don't want to leave the house in case I harm someone. I don't want to be in certain situations in case I harm someone. I don't want to have access to anything that could be considered a weapon, anything like that. So it starts off with the obsessive thoughts. The obsessive thoughts get worse because of the emotions. So the emotions being mainly fear, but also can be sadness, anger, any kind of emotion that really ramps up the obsessive thoughts. And then in order to prevent all of this from happening, because we get so stuck with the thoughts and high emotions, that's when the compulsive behaviours come in. The compulsive behaviours are subconsciously a way to try and stop all of this and to break the cycle, but it actually feeds the cycle. So again, with harm OCD, it would be not leaving the house. It would be kind of getting rid of all your knives and forks. It would be constantly checking yourself around how you feel, or constantly checking, have I left the oven on? Have I left the iron on? Have I done anything that could potentially harm someone? And so going back and forth, checking and again and again and again, constantly just checking in on a scale of 1 to 10. How likely is it that I'm going to harm someone today? That kind of thing. So they're the three core elements of obsessive compulsive disorder. So what are the signs and symptoms of OCD? How do you recognize it in someone else, and how do you recognize it in yourself? So the first symptom I would say would be intrusive thoughts, particularly around taboo subjects. And I'll talk a bit more about the difference between intrusive thoughts and normal thoughts in a moment. But definitely intrusive thoughts, definitely avoidance behaviours. So just avoiding going to work, avoiding social situations, avoiding leaving the house, avoiding spending time with certain people, avoiding appointments. It really depends on the theme of OCD that you have. So if you've got health OCD, for example, you might avoid going to the doctor because there's that fear of if I go to the doctor, they might tell me something's wrong. But another compulsive behaviour would be to continuously go to the doctor to really find out if anything is wrong. The symptom is reassurance seeking, so constantly asking people, am I okay? Do you think I'm a bad person? Is this normal? That's a big one. Is this normal? I'm having thoughts about this. Have you ever had thoughts about that? I can't stop thinking about this. Is that something that you've experienced? And really getting people to reassure, usually by venting to them, and it kind of feeds that cycle of anxiety. Anxiety is obviously another symptom as well, so really high levels of anxiety, chronic doubt, so just really doubting yourself. If you've got relationship OCD, really doubting your relationship, perhaps doubting your existence, just chronic doubt, again kind of depending on the subject matter and how your OCD has latched onto a particular subject matter. Another symptom is checking. So I kind of touched on this before around just checking if things are switched on or off, checking in with yourself, checking in with how you feel, checking in with your thoughts. For relationship OCD, this could be like checking, do I feel attracted to my partner today? Do I feel in love? But for harm OCD, like I mentioned, it could be just checking if something's been switched off. For driving, for example, it could be kind of driving around to check that you've not hit someone. So going back to that same spot, just in case. Another symptom or sign is counting. So you might see somebody kind of constantly counting in their head or saying their thoughts out loud and checking something 4 times, but that might not feel enough. So actually you need to up it to 5 times to 6 times. So there can be a lot of counting involved when it comes to OCD, as well as just repeating your thoughts and again until you feel some sort of level of comfort. Hoarding disorder is like a separate disorder, but it's certainly part of the OCD family. So again, if you're seeing somebody really start to have hoarding behaviours, it's all kind of linked to wanting to feel safe, wanting to feel a bit more in control, and that fear of something really bad happening. So it's that sense of like, no, I need to keep everything just in case. If I throw this away, is a relative going to die? If I throw this away, does that mean something deeper? If I throw this away, is something really bad going to happen? So that's how it starts, and then of course it builds and builds, and that's how hoarding can happen. There's definitely a sense of order when it comes to OCD, and I think that's where those stereotypes come from, that sense of I need everything to be in the correct place. Again, it's that thing of trying to prevent something really bad from happening, and that connection gets made. If I keep everything in order, that is the only way to prevent something really bad from happening. And other symptoms include chronic guilt, chronic anxiety, a lot of fear. People don't like to feel anxious, people don't like to be afraid, obviously, so having fear of that fear sensation, as well as a need for certainty. OCD thrives on that need for certainty. I need to know if there's anything wrong with me health-wise. I need to know if I've left the oven on or not. I need to know if that I'm definitely not going to harm anyone. I need to know if I'm in the right relationship. Need to know. It is desperate for certainty. So that is another sign and symptom. So the difference between intrusive thoughts and normal thoughts is that intrusive thoughts usually come quite suddenly and they are very unwanted. They're usually about like taboo subjects or things that we don't want to be thinking about. Something that I share with my clients is that intrusive thoughts are actually really normal, really common. So for example, we might have a thought about pushing somebody at a railway in front of the train. It doesn't actually mean that we want to do that, but we might just be stood on the platform and a little thought comes into our heads of like, oh, if I push that guy, he would die. And it sounds really dark. I'm sure if you're listening to this, you're already thinking of examples where you've had very kind of strange, fleeting thoughts. It is a very common part of the human experience. The difference when it comes to OCD is when we latch onto those thoughts and when we attach a lot of meaning to those thoughts. So it's like, I'm thinking about pushing somebody off a platform. What is wrong with me? Why on earth would I be thinking that? Why on earth would I want to do that? Oh my God, I must be a really, really bad person. There must be something wrong with me. I must be a danger to society, etc. And that's how it escalates. But having the thoughts go in and out, even having intrusive thoughts, is quite common. It's important to know as well that intrusive thoughts aren't just thoughts. They can also be intrusive feelings. So like just an intrusive gut feeling, a feeling of anxiety or dread or shame or any type of feeling, and intrusive images as well. So just like a flash of a certain image of something can also be intrusive. So it's not just thoughts. Okay, so now I want to talk about the different types of OCD. So I've mentioned already that there's different themes that OCD can attach to. So I want to talk about the different examples. So I've already mentioned harm OCD, which is centered around the fear of harming others. Health OCD, which is of course the fear of becoming unwell. It's also linked to the fear of dying. There's also driving OCD, which is centered around the fear of driving, but also is linked to fear of harming somebody or harming yourself in the car. Any driving related fears can trigger driving OCD. There's also contamination OCD. And again, I think contamination OCD is the form that we all associate OCD with. Fear of germs, fear of disease, fear of dirt, filth, and contains a lot of compulsive behaviours around cleaning, around order, around continuously washing your hands. So that is contamination OCD. So people say OCD, they're usually thinking of contamination OCD, but there are, of course, lots of different other types. Another one is sensory motor OCD. So this is a preoccupation with your bodily sensations, or even like the sound of your thoughts. So being really acutely aware of your breath, your heartbeat, perhaps swallowing, any kind of physical sensation that OCD can absolutely latch to. OCD as well also has taboo themes. So we've got POCD, which is a fear around having thoughts linked to being a paedophile or having just intrusive thoughts, really unwanted sexual thoughts to do with children, or the fear of having that. Harm OCD is obviously another taboo one, because a bit like the kind of pushing someone off a platform, that is obviously very taboo. There is homosexuality OCD, so the fear of being gay or thinking that you are gay or being attracted to your friends, that kind of thing. There is sleep OCD, so again, fear around sleep, not being able to sleep, having disturbed sleep, and obsessively thinking about sleep and doing compulsions related to sleep. So there is a pattern here. Any theme contains obsessive thoughts, attaching a lot of meaning to those thoughts, having a lot of fear around those thoughts, and then doing compulsive behaviours to avoid them. There's also existential OCD, so the fear of not existing, or perhaps being a part of a TV show, or life just not feeling real. And you can have OCD, or over having a mental illness. So again, that fear of I am unwell, or do I have OCD, and obsessing over having OCD and doing compulsive behaviours to prevent actually having OCD. So it sounds a bit confusing, but hopefully you get the idea around that pattern of obsessive thoughts over something. It can technically latch to anything. There are just more common themes. Then having triggered emotions and feelings and anxieties, and chronic anxiety and guilt and shame, and then compulsive behaviours to try and regain control. And that is the cycle for all of those things. There is also pure O, which is a form of OCD that doesn't really have the compulsive behaviours. It is just pure obsession. People with pure O are just constantly in that state of obsessive thoughts. So what causes OCD? That's a big question that I get sometimes. And to be honest, it's really hard to say. There's lots of different factors that could contribute to why you or someone else that you know has OCD. It can be triggered by a traumatic event, or just a big transitional event, a big life event. It could also be triggered by personality traits. So anybody that likes things a certain way, has a desire to be in control, doesn't like feeling out of control or things kind of being left in the open. Not to say that anyone that has that personality type has OCD, but it's just a personality type that can contribute. There are, of course, chemical factors, chemical imbalance in the brain. In the same way with other mental health conditions, it can definitely be like chemical, it can definitely be genetic as well. And it also can be triggered by other mental health conditions. So again, if you're somebody that has generalized anxiety disorder, which I spoke about in a previous video, then that could lead to OCD. Again, it's not a guarantee, but if you're highly anxious about everything, that can lead to intrusive thoughts, which can then lead to compulsive behaviours. So next I want to talk about the impact of OCD on people's lives. And to be honest, it can impact everything. It can impact your relationships with people, it can impact work, it can impact family. I had to switch to my laptop to record the rest of this video because my phone was just massively playing up. So I hope this is okay. It's obviously got the blurred background going on and not quite the same quality, but hopefully the rest will be okay for you. So before, I was talking about the impact that OCD has on people's lives, and I was talking about how family can very much be affected. So if you're struggling with POCD, for example, you can absolutely start to avoid family functions, avoid Christmas, or get just extremely anxious and suffering big time, during those holiday family periods. It can also really affect big occasions. So if you're getting married, for example, or you're about to go on holiday with your partner, people that have like relationship OCD are going to be probably highly anxious of like, is this going to go well? Am I going to feel connected? Am I going to feel happy on my wedding day? Am I going to feel in love? But even outside of that, even outside of relationship OCD, people might just have that fear of suffering. You know, during big occasions, a lot of my clients with OCD really struggle around times where they're expected to feel good. So holidays, for example, Christmas, time off, any kind of big events. Also, transitional periods are really difficult as well. So anything like moving house or the next stage in your relationship or having children, perhaps getting a promotion, that can all be really challenging as well. Another way it can impact is the compulsive behaviours can really take over someone's life. So people can spend hours upon hours doing compulsive behaviour, whether that's Googling for hours, like Googling your symptoms, or just Googling questions to try and seek that reassurance. Or it could be the checking, like if you've got driving OCD, for example, or harm OCD, the kind of driving around town to really make sure that you've not hurt anyone or hit someone. And that taking up a huge chunk of your day. And again, that links to work and relationships as well. So it really can become all consuming. For a lot of people who have OCD, the compulsive behaviours can really take over their whole life. And substance misuse as well is another thing I would say. So a lot of people look for ways to cope to reduce the intrusive thoughts. So a lot of people start drinking alcohol in order to quiet their minds, or taking drugs in order to feel good, or smoking weed to try and relax and get rid of the chronic anxiety and chronic guilt over their thoughts and feelings. So we do see a lot of high levels of substance misuse as well. And this leads to how is OCD connected to other mental health conditions then? So I've already spoken a bit about the connection between generalized anxiety. Again, because a symptom of OCD is really high levels of anxiety, it makes sense. If you're suffering with anxiety, then that might lead to attaching a lot of meaning to your intrusive thoughts, and then that might lead to compulsive behaviours. So they're definitely connected. OCD is also connected to eating disorders, and I think the link here is all about control. So I won't go massively into eating disorders in today's video, as that will probably be a separate video. But eating disorders are heavily triggered by needing that sense of control and wanting to reduce that feeling of being out of control. And one thing that they can control is their food consumption or their weight. And OCD is really linked to that, because it is trying to prevent something from happening, trying to regain control of life, of the situation. So that's that connection. And there's absolutely a link to suicidal thoughts and depression as well, because again, if the compulsive behaviours are really taking over your life, if you're really starting to believe the thoughts, so if you're starting to really believe that you're a terrible person, or that you don't exist, or that you're in the wrong relationship, or that you're dying anyway from some sort of health condition, or starting to have feelings for the wrong person, or that you are having unwanted sexual thoughts about underage people, anything like that is potentially going to lead to suicidal thoughts, because if you believe them so much and you're suffering so much, then naturally that might happen, which is really dangerous, obviously. And if that is you, you should definitely call the resources that I'm going to leave down below, call helplines, and get the support that you need. And as previously mentioned, OCD is linked to hoarding disorder as well. It's a separate disorder, but definitely linked to OCD. And again, a bit like what I was saying about the eating disorder, there's that connection there around wanting to feel a bit more in control, wanting to gain certainty. If I keep all this stuff, I will feel safer, I will feel more in control, I will reduce the likelihood of these thoughts being real. So let's move on to how do you get a diagnosis for OCD. There are questionnaires online to see if you're likely to have OCD, but it usually starts with an appointment with your GP. So if you go to your GP, explain what's happening, share that you think you might have OCD, and the GP will usually ask some screening questions to kind of build their sense of whether or not, they think that you have OCD as well. And then from there, there's usually a further assessment. And then from that, if they do believe that you have OCD, they obviously can talk to you about medication as well as referral to therapy. It's important to note though that even if none of that happens, if you have like a bad experience with your doctor or they're not sure if you've got OCD and the further assessment doesn't happen, lots of people can have a mental health condition that is like self-diagnosed, or they feel like they have it. It doesn't make it less valid. I totally appreciate that getting an official diagnosis can feel really important. But even if you're having symptoms of OCD, that's definitely worth getting support with. So, for example, you might just be in a state of having obsessive thoughts, or you might be kind of starting to have some compulsive behaviours or just high levels of anxiety. Even if you don't fall neatly into the bracket of OCD or there isn't a specific theme, it doesn't mean that your experience is any less valid and that you shouldn't get the support that's needed. And that reminds me, in terms of something around themes, that I've got to say is that you can switch from theme to theme. So these themes aren't fixed. You can be suffering with harm OCD, and then a few weeks later you're starting to have doubts and intrusive thoughts about your relationship. And then a few months later, you might start to even question your sexuality and have intrusive thoughts around that. So it can move to different themes. So in terms of treatment then, after you've spoken to your GP and you've got a good sense that you do have OCD, then absolutely the next stage is therapy or medication. Again, definitely talk to your psychiatrist or GP about medication, but it usually involves a type of medication that will reduce the intrusive thoughts for you. So kind of stopping the cycle of OCD before it can really latch. That is really helpful for a lot of people, but also CBT therapy is really beneficial for OCD as well, because it can really support you in noticing those patterns and supporting you with exposure therapy and reducing the compulsive behaviours, which I'll talk a bit more about in a moment. There's other types of therapy as well, like person-centered therapy. If CBT is definitely not for everyone, and if CBT is not for you, then I'd really encourage you to have more of a talking therapy, especially if you want to open up as just the general experience of OCD. OCD is obviously a really debilitating mental health condition to have. And so if you want more space, rather than just getting straight to tackling the problem at hand, if you want more space to actually talk about the impact, then that can be really, really beneficial for you as well, to have more of a talking therapy. Another really important thing with OCD recovery is support group. So speaking to other people with OCD. Again, I'm going to share some resources down below, but I would really encourage you to reach out to other people or follow other people on social media who suffer with OCD, as it can be so isolating. And especially if you're having thoughts around what's wrong with me, am I a bad person? And it feels really real, knowing that other people are suffering with the same thing can be really beneficial in terms of reducing that fear of like there is something very inherently wrong or bad about you. The main thing with OCD recovery is to work on reducing the compulsive behaviours, and this is usually done by obviously resistance, actually stopping doing a compulsive behaviour before you do it. So stop seeking reassurance, stop asking people is this normal, am I okay, is there something wrong with me? That has to go. Stop Googling, which is similar to reassurance seeking. Stop checking, or at least reduce your checking. So actually when you leave the front door, instead of that urge to turn around and check, have I left the oven on, actually leave it, which is really scary. That's why it's exposure therapy, because you're kind of taking baby steps in that right direction to reduce that need for the compulsive behaviour. Actually sitting with your feelings is a massive part of OCD recovery. So accepting the thoughts and the feelings, not seeing things as good and bad, so black and white. So let's use harm OCD as an example. Let's go for the extreme. I was going to use relationship, but let's go for harm. So you have the thought of, what if I hurt somebody at the train station? So I'm just not going to go. the exposure therapy would be to go and to feel uncomfortable. So you go to the train station, you're sat on the platform, you're thinking, oh my God, I can't be near anyone just in case I have the urge to push someone, or I start having images about pushing people. But you sit there, you sit with the anxiety, you accept it, you let it in. You don't have to like it. Liking is different to accepting, but you gently remind yourself that you're safe, that you are in control, and that just because you're having these thoughts doesn't mean that you're actually going to do it. Be mindful of too much self-reassurance, because that is a form of reassurance still. But definitely when you're first starting with exposure therapy, it's okay to reassure yourself a little bit. The plan is, though, going forward, is that you wouldn't be needing reassurance at all to really reduce that compulsive behaviour. So what we're talking about here is building tolerance, being able to tolerate anxiety, being able to tolerate the thoughts, being able to tolerate the intrusive feelings. That's what we're getting to here. We're also talking about building resilience as well. And we're talking about letting go of certainty. So I've spoken a lot about certainty today, and OCD thriving on that need for certainty, but actually we don't need it. And actually really leaning into the idea of, like, do we need to know what the answer is? Do we need to know 100% for a fact that we're in the right relationship or not? And what does that even mean? Like, what does the right relationship even mean? And actually being open to the possibility that perhaps there is somebody better off for us, perhaps there is somebody that we'd be more compatible with. But actually, it's not the end of the world that we're currently partnered with somebody that is perhaps a bit less compatible than some random person that you're thinking of. So that's definitely what we want to be working towards, is letting go of certainty, or the need for certainty, completely. And it's about doing things anyway. So I mentioned the train station, but definitely that idea of anything that we feel this desire to avoid, we should lean into it anyway. So go on the date with your partner, leave the house, go to work, meet up with the friends that you're worried that you might be attracted to, or you're having intrusive thoughts about being attracted to your friends, get in the car and drive, that kind of thing. So it's about feeling uncomfortable and doing it anyway. Another thing that's really good for OCD recovery is life structure. So compulsive behaviours and chronic anxiety can really, as I said, take over your entire day, your entire life. So definitely putting in, not too rigid, but some sort of routine in, for sure. So as soon as you wake up, get up, have some breakfast, or go for a walk, go to the gym, then do this, then do that, and go through the motions of that routine, even if you're feeling anxious, even if you're struggling with the desire to do compulsive behaviours. Having a routine can really help move away from the compulsive behaviours and the way it can be all-consuming. And I mentioned this in my last video on anxiety, so I'm not going to talk about it too much today, but definitely there is a holistic approach involved here. I say that especially as a person-centered therapist, and can really appreciate that everyone is so different. Of course, not everyone is the same. So it's really important that you add things in your recovery that's important to you, and really think about your overall well-being. So sleep. Obviously, if you've got sleep OCD, this is going to be really challenging, but definitely trying to get a decent night's sleep, definitely eating well, definitely moving your body, definitely kind of getting out of the house, getting fresh air, drinking water, socializing, talking with people, not getting yourself kind of really isolated and stuck in any kind of unhealthy patterns or behaviours, I would really be mindful of. But I went into that a bit more detail in my anxiety video, if you want to check out the last few minutes of that video. So before we wrap up, I just want to talk about what's called the backdoor spike. So perhaps you're somebody who has, step one, recognise that they have OCD, which is amazing. Step two, gone to their GP, sought help. Perhaps you're on medication, perhaps you're seeing a therapist. You're also trying to do exposure therapy, reduce your compulsive behaviours, and, sit with being uncomfortable, sitting with the thoughts, and perhaps your lifestyle's got a bit healthier as well, treating yourself holistically, like as I mentioned. What can happen is we can be doing really well, feeling really great. We notice, oh, perhaps I don't have OCD anymore, like the thoughts are gone, or the feelings are gone, or the images are gone, or I don't have that urge to do the compulsive behaviours anymore. Like, amazing, happy days, celebrate, and then out of nowhere we can relapse. And we call this the backdoor spike, where it's very sneaky. Through the back door, we get a spike of anxiety, and it really can derail us in terms of we need to do compulsions immediately. We panic over that fear of fear as well. Oh God, it's back. Perhaps fear of OCD. It all spikes, basically. It can also be a different theme, which can throw us off and can feel more real. So if you're someone, for example, that has struggled for a year with relationship-related OCD, I'm going to do a specific video on different themes, I think, as well, because I've mentioned so many different themes, and some of you might want more information about them. We've been suffering with relationship OCD for a year, then we start to recover, we've put so many things in place, we're doing really well, and then we randomly start getting thoughts about harm and harming others. And because it's quite a taboo one, it could really throw us off. Oh my God, if it wasn't real before, it is definitely real now. These thoughts are definitely real because they're so strong and they're hitting me out of nowhere. And then it can really be a high level of anxiety and can really set us back massively. It doesn't mean that you're completely going back to square one because you've built all that knowledge and all those exposures and stuff. It just means that you're having a relapse, and then you just need to start reintroducing all of those things again. So talking to your therapist, talking to your GP, perhaps going back on medication, and maybe switching up your exposure therapy as well to fit with your new themes. So it just gives you pause for thought to reevaluate where you're at in your recovery, and almost like a reset for your recovery. So please don't be alarmed by the backdoor spike. Apologies for my phone issues and the switch up with the settings here. Very frustrating, as you can imagine, but I really wanted to make sure that I got to the end of this video for you. So if you've got to this point, I really, really appreciate it. As I said, there are timestamps down below for you to rewatch any parts, and there's also links to lots of different further resources to kind of start you on your journey to recovery. If you are interested in more videos around mental health or therapy or other mental health conditions like this, please subscribe to my channel. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please give it a thumbs up, and let me know in the comments about any other videos on mental health conditions that you'd like to see. Thanks again so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.